The woman in booth 4 had been dead for about an hour before any of us noticed. She was sitting upright with her hands around a coffee mug, chin dipped toward her chest, and from a distance, she looked like someone who had fallen asleep waiting for an order that was never coming. It was Marcus who checked. He touched her shoulder and her head rolled sideways, and he said, "She's cold," in a voice so flat it could have been a weather report. That was day 11. We wrapped her in tablecloths and carried her out the service entrance, into the dumpster enclosure, and none of us spoke for the rest of the afternoon. Not because we were mourning. We barely knew her name, Carol or Caroline. She had never clarified. But because she had died of something we could not identify, in a locked building, surrounded by people, and the cause of death being unknown, was worse than any cause of death we could have named. If you've ever found yourself somewhere you never planned to be, tell me where you're listening from in the comments. And if you want to stay with this story, consider subscribing. I am Audrey Yoon, 34. I managed a veterinary clinic in Greenville until 14 days ago, when the world performed its rapid and irreversible revision. I did not choose the Waffle House. The Waffle House chose me, in the way that a life raft chooses a drowning person, by being the nearest solid thing when the water arrived. I was driving south on I-85 toward my mother's house in Anderson when the highway seized. Not traffic, seizure. Every vehicle stopping simultaneously, doors opening, people running perpendicular to the road into fields and tree lines. And in the distance ahead, visible above the roof lines of the exit ramp, a churning of bodies that moved like a flock of starlings. Coordinated, but mindless. Beautiful if you did not understand what you were seeing. I understood. I'd been listening to the radio for 6 hours. Charleston was gone. Columbia was contested. The infection had entered South Carolina through the port and spread along the interstate corridors with the predictable efficiency of a logistics network. Because that is what highways are. Arteries designed to move volume, indifferent to what the volume contains. I pulled off at exit 42, Piedmont, and the Waffle House was there the way Waffle Houses are always there. Yellow sign, plate glass windows, parking lot cracked by Carolina heat, open 24 hours as a matter of institutional principle, though the principle had been tested and was failing. 7 people were already inside, not together. They had arrived separately, in the same panicked centrifugal scatter that had thrown me off the highway. And they occupied the restaurant the way strangers occupy an elevator, maintaining maximum distance while sharing minimal space. Marcus Bell, 48, long-haul trucker from Fayetteville, was behind the counter eating hash browns he had cooked himself. June Dow, 61, retired schoolteacher, was in the corner booth with a suitcase and a rosary. Tommy Pruitt, 22, was pacing the length of the restaurant in a Clemson hoodie, burning energy he did not have a container for. A couple, later introduced as Wes and Dina Hargrove, both near 40, sat in a booth with their 12-year-old son, Eli, who was drawing on a placemat with a pen he'd found near the register. And Carol or Caroline, the woman who would die on day 11 from something we never diagnosed, was already in booth 4 with her coffee mug, already quiet, already receding. I walked in, and Marcus looked up and said, "Grill still works, waffle iron's broken." This was his greeting. This was the social contract he offered. "I will feed you. Do not ask me for more." I sat at the counter, and he put a plate of eggs in front of me, and as I ate them, and, through the plate glass window, I watched 3 figures cross the parking lot of the Kangaroo gas station next door. They moved the way the radio had described. Deliberate, but directionless. Their bodies committing to each step, as though locomotion was a skill that they were remembering in real time. One of them stopped and turned toward the Waffle House. It looked at the building. I do not mean it faced the building. It looked at it, the way a person looks at a house they once lived in. Recognition without comprehension. Marcus said, "They've been doing that all morning, looking but not coming." "Why not?" "Couldn't tell you. But they don't like the glass." That was the first thing we learned about them. It would not be the last. By sundown, there were 9 of us, and approximately 40 of them. I use approximately, not because I could not count, but because counting required watching, and watching required standing at the plate glass windows that comprised 60% of the Waffle House's exterior wall surface. And standing at those windows meant being visible to things that were learning to look. Marcus's observation about the glass held through the first afternoon. The infected, I will call them that, not zombies, not walkers, not any of the words that Tommy used with the relish of a young man who had consumed a decade of apocalypse fiction and was now thrilled to inhabit it. Approached the building repeatedly but stopped at the parking lot's edge. They would orient toward the windows, hold position for 30 seconds to a minute, and then redirect toward something else. A sound, a bird, a car alarm cycling 3 blocks east. They were distractible. They were also, in their pauses, unnervingly attentive. "It's the light," June said. She had moved from her corner booth to a center table and was watching them with the focused patience of a woman who had spent 35 years observing children. "They can see their own reflections. Look, that one is staring at itself." She was right. A figure in the parking lot, male, wearing the khaki uniform of the gas station next door, had stopped directly in front of the large window and was gazing at its own reflection with an intensity that bordered on fascination. Its hands were at its sides. Its mouth was open. It stood there for 2 full minutes before turning away. When it turned, another took its place. Not intentionally. The second figure drifted into the same spot and underwent the same arrest, the same fixed staring at the glass that threw its image back. "Mirrors," Marcus said. "Not mirrors," June corrected. "Reflections. There's a difference. A mirror shows you yourself. A reflection shows you something that looks like yourself. They're confused by the resemblance." Tommy, who had finally stopped pacing, said, "So they're narcissists." No one laughed. Tommy's humor was the kind that needed an audience to survive, and this audience was not cooperating. Wes Hargrove had been quiet since I arrived. He was a lean man with a jaw that worked constantly, chewing nothing, processing everything through his teeth. He spoke now for the first time in my presence. "If the glass keeps them out, the glass is our wall. If the glass is our wall, we cannot break the glass, which means we cannot open the front door." The logic was immediate and constraining. The Waffle House had 3 points of entry. The front door, which was floor-to-ceiling glass, the service entrance in the back, a solid metal door that opened into the dumpster enclosure, and the kitchen's ventilation hatch on the roof, accessible via a utility ladder bolted to the exterior. The front door was now conceptually sealed, not by a barricade, but by the principle that opening it would break the reflective surface the infected were responding to. We were protected not by strength, but by an optical accident. Our fortress was made of light. Dina Hargrove was the first to address the obvious. "What happens at night? When the lights inside are on and it's dark outside, the reflection reverses. We become visible. They see through the glass instead of seeing themselves." Silence. The kind that settles when a group simultaneously understands a problem they had been individually avoiding. "Then we go dark at night," I said. "No interior lights after sundown. We operate by the emergency exit signs and whatever ambient light comes through." "We have a grill," Marcus said. "Grill has a flame. Kitchen is interior. No windows face the grill. We cook during the day, eat cold at night." Marcus processed this for 3 seconds, then nodded. It was the first collective decision the group made, and it was made not by vote or debate, but by the momentum of one person stating what was necessary, and no one objecting. This is how governance begins, not with constitutions, but with the absence of a better idea. Night came. We went dark. The parking lot filled with shapes we could hear but not see. Eli Hargrove whispered, "They sound like they're breathing." They were. Day 3 introduced the problem that would define our first month. Food. A Waffle House is not a warehouse. It is a just-in-time operation designed to receive deliveries 3 times per week, converting perishable inputs into immediate outputs with minimal storage. The walk-in cooler held eggs, bacon, sausage, and butter, and pre-mixed waffle batter in quantities sufficient for perhaps 48 hours of normal operation. The dry storage was more promising. Industrial bags of flour, sugar, grits, pancake mix, sealed containers of coffee, cooking oil in 5-gallon jugs, canned goods for the chili, and an inventory of condiment packets that Marcus counted with the seriousness of a man who understood that one day a packet of grape jelly might constitute a meal. I performed an inventory with Marcus on day 3 because no one else volunteered, and because the two of us had, without discussion, assumed complementary roles. He controlled the kitchen, and I controlled the information. This was not a hierarchy. It was a division that emerged from temperament. Marcus preferred objects. I preferred systems. Together, we produced a spreadsheet written on the back of a laminated menu in permanent marker. The result? At strict rationing. 1 meal per day per person, approximately 800 calories. We had 32 days of food. At 2 meals per day, 16. These numbers assumed 9 people, and on day 11, they would adjust to 8. And the adjustment would arrive as relief I was ashamed to feel. 32 days, Marcus said. He was leaning against the grill hood, arms crossed, reading the menu spreadsheet with the expression of a man who has driven coast to coast and knows exactly what 400 miles of empty feels like. Then what? Then we forage or we starve. Forage where? The kangaroo is 60 yards across open ground. The grocery store is a half-mile south on the state road. Every building between here and there is glass-fronted, which means every building has its own little crowd standing in the parking lot looking at themselves. There's also the distribution logic, I said. If we ration equally, Tommy eats the same as Eli. Tommy weighs 200 pounds. Eli weighs maybe 90. Equal distribution is inequitable, and inequitable distribution is unfair. Marcus stared at me. You want to give the kid more food. I want to give everyone what they need, which is not what everyone else needs. And who decides what everyone needs? That's the question. It was the question. Not the only question, but the one that would metastasize over the following weeks into every disagreement, every tension, every silent resentment that accumulated in a 1,200-square-foot restaurant where 8 people ate, slept, argued, and excreted in proximity so intimate that the concept of privacy dissolved entirely by day 6. We rationed equally. I knew it was wrong by the arithmetic and right by the politics, and I chose politics because 32 days in a room with people who feel cheated is worse than 32 days in a room with people who are hungry. June Dow caught me recalculating on day 5. She sat across from me at the counter and watched me erase and rewrite numbers on the menu and said, "You're doing the math again." I said, "The math keeps changing." She said, "The math is not changing. You are recounting because you want a different answer." She was a retired school teacher, and she recognized obsessive recalculation the way a mechanic recognizes a ticking engine. Not as a mystery, but as a symptom. "What would you do?" I asked. "I would pray," she said. "But I understand that is not your methodology. My methodology is veterinary medicine. I spent 12 years calculating caloric needs for animals who couldn't tell me if they were hungry. And now you're doing it for people who can tell you, and you're not asking them." She was right. I had not asked anyone what they needed. I had assessed and allocated with the clinical detachment of someone managing a kennel, and the realization that this was my instinct. To manage, rather than consult, was uncomfortable enough that I put the marker down and looked at her. "What do you need, June?" "Less coffee, more conversation, and to stop sleeping under a table." I could address 2 of those 3. We reorganized the sleeping arrangements that evening. Day 15, the glass theory held but mutated. The infected still gathered in the parking lot at dusk, still oriented toward the windows, still appeared arrested by their own reflections in the plate glass. but their behavior had shifted in ways that June documented with a precision I would not have expected from a woman whose primary tool was a rosary. She had claimed a booth near the front window and spent daylight hours observing, and her observations were not casual. She narrated them to Eli, who wrote them in a composition notebook Dina had found in the office. Because June's hands shook too much to write, and because giving a 12-year-old a scientific task was, she told me, the best pedagogy available. They're staying longer, she reported on day 15. The first week, average window engagement was 45 seconds. Now it's 3 to 4 minutes, and they're touching the glass. She was right. I watched a woman in a floral blouse press both palms flat against the window, her face inches from the surface, her breath fogging the glass in rhythmic plumes. She was not trying to break through. She was touching her own image the way you touch a photograph. Behind her, 3 others waited. Not in a line, not organized, but proximate, angled toward the same window, exhibiting what June called cue behavior. They're learning, Eli said. He did not say it with fear. He said it with the unsettling neutrality of a child recording data. They're not learning, Wes corrected from across the restaurant. He was dismantling a booth seat with a butter knife, extracting the foam padding for reasons he had not yet disclosed. Learning requires cognition. They're habituating. There's a difference. What's the practical difference? I asked. If they're learning, they'll eventually figure out the glass isn't them. If they're habituating, they'll keep coming because it feels familiar. One is dangerous. The other is just depressing. Tommy, perched on the counter with his legs dangling, said, "Both sound dangerous to me." For once, his contribution was accurate. The reflection problem was compounding. During the day, when exterior light exceeded interior light, the glass acted as a mirror, and the infected saw themselves and froze. At night, when we killed the interior lights, the glass became transparent from the outside. But there was nothing to see, so the infected drifted away. The vulnerability window was dusk and dawn, the transitional minutes when light levels equalized and the glass became bidirectional. During those minutes, someone standing inside could see out, and someone standing outside could see in, and the infected, confronted with a reflection that now contained movement behind it, us, visible through our own barrier, became agitated in ways that had escalated from shuffling to striking. On day 13, one of them had hit the window, not hard. An open palm, the sound like a bass drum felt in the sternum. The glass held. The figure retreated. But the precedent was established. The barrier that protected us was also the barrier that attracted them. And attraction and aggression existed on a continuum we could not control. Marcus proposed boarding up the windows. I opposed it. The argument was our first real confrontation, conducted across the counter with the formality of a legal proceeding. Marcus standing, arms braced on the stainless steel, me sitting, hands flat on the laminate. And it drew the attention of everyone in the building. "Plywood from the dumpster enclosure fence," Marcus said. "We pull the boards, nail them over the glass from inside. They can't see in. We can't see out. Problem solved. If we cover the glass, we lose the reflection effect. The reflection is why they don't breach. Remove it, and they have no reason to stop at the parking lot's edge. They're already not stopping. They hit the window 2 days ago." One hit, one palm. The reflection confused it enough to retreat. Remove the reflection and what replaces the confusion? Marcus had no answer. I had no answer. We both knew that our safety was balanced on a mechanism neither of us could guarantee, and that the mechanism was degrading, and that the degradation was happening at a pace set not by physics, but by whatever process was occurring inside the skulls of the things standing in our parking lot, pressing their palms to our windows like visitors at an aquarium. We left the glass uncovered. We were right to. We were also, eventually, wrong. Wes Hargrove had been building something in the kitchen for 9 days. I had noticed the activity. The disassembled booth cushions, The conduit he had unscrewed from the ceiling above the prep area. The wire he had stripped from the emergency exit signs. But I had not asked, because the Waffle House had developed an unspoken code in which personal projects were tolerated, as long as they did not consume shared resources or generate noise after dark. Tommy did pull-ups on the walk-in cooler door frame. June prayed her rosary in a whispered rhythm that was almost subliminal. Dina wrote in a journal she guarded with the territorial intensity of someone protecting the last private space available. These were the rituals of confinement, and Wes's tinkering was his. On day 17, he showed me what he had built. It was a directional speaker, or rather, it was the skeleton of one. A parabolic reflector fashioned from the curved interior of the industrial mixer's bowl, mounted on a conduit frame with a small Bluetooth speaker from Dina's purse positioned at the focal point. The construction was rough, but the physics were sound. I was an audio engineer, Wes said. 16 years. Concert touring, then installation work for churches and convention centers. I know how sound moves. What does this do for us? The infected respond to sound. Everyone knows that. Car alarms pull them, gunshots pull them. But they respond directionally. Sound from the left, they move left. Sound from the right, they move right. This lets me throw sound in a specific direction from inside the building, without the sound being audible at its point of origin. I stared at the device. You want to herd them. I want to move them, not herd. Redirect. If we can project sound 200, 300 feet in a specific direction, we can clear the parking lot. We can create a corridor. 10 minutes, maybe 15, where the space between us and the gas station is empty. The Kangaroo gas station, 60 yards east. Its inventory was unknown, but its structure was visible from our windows. A standard convenience store with shelved goods, a drink cooler, and behind the counter a locked cage that might contain cigarettes, or might contain ammunition, or might contain nothing. The distance was short. The exposure was absolute. But with food projections tightening, 21 days remaining at current rationing, the math of staying was converging with the math of going, and Wes's speaker was the first tool that made going conceivable. Marcus was skeptical. You're going to blast music at them and hope they follow it like the Pied Piper. Not music. Frequency. They respond most to mid-range tones, 800 to 1,200 hertz. June's observations confirm it. They orient toward engine sounds, alarm tones, human speech, all mid-range. If I project a sustained tone in that range toward the tree line, south of the gas station, they'll migrate toward the source. And if they don't, then whoever is in the parking lot has about 30 seconds to get back inside. The whoever was the element no one wanted but to address. Operating the speaker required someone inside. Crossing the parking lot required someone outside. The outside person would be exposed, dependent on the inside person's device, and operating on a timeline determined not by a clock, but by the attention span of creatures whose cognitive processes were a black box. I'll go, Tommy said. He said it immediately, the way he said everything, fast, without visible calculation, propelled by an energy that could be mistaken for bravery, but was, I suspected, closer to an inability to sit still. You will not, Dina said. She did not raise her voice. She rarely did. But her tone carried the structural load of a woman who had spent 12 years protecting a child in a world that had been dangerous long before it became apocalyptic. If someone goes, it should be someone who can assess what's worth carrying back. She looked at me. Marcus looked at me. Wes looked at his speaker. June looked at her rosary. Eli looked at his notebook. Tommy said, "Why is everyone looking at the vet?" Because the vet had spent a career performing triage under pressure in rooms full of unpredictable animals. No one said this. Everyone meant it. Day 19, we tested Wes's speaker at dawn during the vulnerability window, when the parking lot held its usual congregation of 11 infected and the light was flat enough to see without being seen. Wes positioned the parabolic reflector against the kitchen's ventilation hatch, the only opening that faced south toward the tree line. and transmitted a sustained 1,000 hertz tone at maximum volume. The effect was not instantaneous. For 10 seconds, nothing changed. The figures in the parking lot continued their slow rotations, their glass gazing, their aimless circulations. Then one turned, a tall man in coveralls, his head snapping south with a precision that was mechanical rather than biological. He began walking toward the tree line. A second followed, a third. Within 45 seconds, 8 of the 11 had redirected, moving south across the parking lot and into the scrub grass that bordered the state road, drawn by a sound they could locate but not reach. 3 remained. 2 were facing the window, deep in their reflection trance, unresponsive to the tone. The third was sitting on the curb near the gas station's air pump, motionless, head down, exhibiting the dormancy behavior June had cataloged. A state of apparent shutdown that could last minutes or hours and ended without predictable trigger. 3 left, Wes said through the kitchen pass-through window. I can work with 3, I said. Marcus handed me a canvas bag. A Waffle House supply sack, heavy gauge, with stitched handles designed for carrying industrial quantities of dry goods. Fill it, don't sort. Just sweep the shelves and fill it. I went through the service entrance. The dumpster enclosure was a concrete-walled rectangle that smelled of decomposition, so concentrated it had become almost architectural, a physical presence, rather than a sensory one. I climbed the enclosure wall, 5 feet, cinder block, manageable, and dropped into the back lot. The kangaroo's rear entrance was visible 40 yards northeast. Between me and it, open asphalt, a propane tank cage, a dumpster of the gas station's own, and the curb where the dormant figures sat. I moved along the tree line rather than crossing the open lot. The ground was red clay, softened by recent rain, and my shoes, running shoes I'd been wearing for 19 days, made sounds I could feel in my teeth. Every footfall was a negotiation between speed and silence won every round, because the consequence of losing was something I could see in my peripheral vision. The dormant figure on the curb, 30 yards to my right, head still down, still motionless. Still an equation I could not solve because the variable was not mathematical but biological, and biology does not show its work. I reached the gas station's back door. It was locked. I had expected this, and carried the pry bar Marcus had fashioned from the grill's grease tray rail. The lock was commercial grade, but the door frame was wood, and wood yields to steel with a sound like a knuckle cracking, sharp and finite. I froze. The dormant figure did not move. I entered. The kangaroo's interior was dim and ransacked, but not empty. Someone had been through before me. Shelves swept, cooler doors open, registers smashed. But they had taken the obvious. Chips, candy, bottled water. They had not taken the canned goods on the bottom shelf. They had not taken the boxes of protein bars behind the counter. They had not found the storage closet, padlocked, which I opened with a pry bar and discovered contained 12 cases of bottled water, 6 cases of canned soup, 4 cases of Vienna sausages, 2 cases of peanut butter crackers, and a first aid kit still sealed in plastic. I loaded the canvas bag until it weighed approximately what a large dog weighs, 50 pounds. The unit of measurement my body understood instinctively. I filled a second bag I found behind the counter. I carried both to the back door and looked out. The dormant figure was standing. It had risen from the curb and was facing the gas station, not the window. The door. The open door, where I stood holding 2 bags of food and a pry bar, and a heartbeat I could hear in the roots of my molars. Wes's tone was still broadcasting. The parking lot was mostly clear, but this one had not followed the sound. It was looking at me, not at a reflection, at me. I set the bags down. The figure was 25 yards away and stationary. Its posture was not aggressive. No forward lean, no bared teeth. None of the predatory indicators the broadcasts had described before the broadcasts ended. It stood with its arms slightly raised from its sides, palms forward, in a posture I recognized from veterinary practice, an animal that is assessing threat level. Not attacking, not fleeing, deciding. I did not run. Running triggers pursuit in every predatory species I have treated. And while I did not know whether the infected were predatory or territorial or something else entirely, I knew that rapid movement would collapse whatever equilibrium the figure was maintaining. I lifted the bag slowly. I stepped backward through the door. I closed it. The figure did not follow. Through the small window in the door. Wire-reinforced glass, industrial. I watched it lower its arms and return to the curb and sit down. I carried the bags along the tree line and over the enclosure wall and through the service entrance. And when I set them on the prep counter, Marcus opened the first one and said, "Peanut butter crackers," and his voice contained more emotion than I had heard from him in 19 days. The haul extended our timeline by approximately 23 days. Combined with remaining Waffle House stock, we now had food for 44 days at current rationing. 50 days if we reduced to 700 calories per person per day, which was sustainable for adults, but dangerous for Eli, whose growing body operated on a metabolic schedule that did not care about resource scarcity. That evening, I described the dormant figure's behavior to June. She listened with her head tilted, rosary still, and when I finished, she said, "It recognized you. It saw me. Those are different things, Audrey. The ones at the window see themselves and become confused. This one saw you, a separate entity distinct from itself, and chose not to act. That's recognition. That's a decision tree. Decision trees require cognition. Then it has cognition. The implication settled over the room like a change in atmospheric pressure. If the infected possessed cognition, not instinct, not reflex, but evaluative processing, then everything we understood about the barrier, the reflection theory, the sound redirection, was contingent on their current level of function, which was itself not static but developing. We were not hiding from animals. We were hiding from something that was getting smarter. Tommy said, "So we're going to sit here and wait for them to figure out doors." He said it with a bitterness that had been accruing since day one, compounding daily, and that I had been monitoring the way I monitored infected behavior as a pattern with a trajectory. "Nobody is waiting for anything," Marcus said. "We have food. We have water. We have a roof. We hold." Hold for what? Rescue? Have you heard a helicopter? A siren? Anything? Marcus had not. None of us had. The silence from the outside world was not the silence of distance. It was the silence of cessation. The sound of systems that had stopped transmitting, because the people who operated them were no longer people. "We hold because holding is alive and not holding is dead," Marcus said. "That's the entire calculation. That's not a calculation. That's stubbornness. Stubbornness has kept this grill running for 19 days. The argument did not escalate because Dina intervened. Not with words, but with action. She stood up, walked to the counter, and began distributing the evening meal. Cold grits, canned soup divided into 8 portions, 2 peanut butter crackers each. The act of eating together interrupted the argument's momentum, the way a speed bump interrupts a car. And by the time the meal was finished, the tension had not resolved, but had been displaced by the communal mechanics of chewing and swallowing. Eli showed me his notebook after dinner. He had drawn the dormant figure from my description, a surprisingly detailed sketch for a 12-year-old, capturing the raised palms, the neutral stance, the quality of assessment I had described. Beneath it, he had written, "This one thinks." I looked at the drawing, and I looked at the boy, and I thought, he is not afraid. He is fascinated. And I did not know whether that was resilience or a deficit I should be worried about. Day 26 introduced the problem I had been dreading since the inventory count. Water. The Waffle House's plumbing operated on municipal pressure, and municipal pressure had failed on day 9. We had been surviving on bottled water from the Kangaroo Hall, the restaurant's ice machine reservoir. which Marcus had drained into every available container before the power became intermittent, and a collection system Wes had improvised from the ventilation hatch, using a tarp funneled into a 5-gallon bucket, which produced approximately 2 gallons per rainfall event. South Carolina in late spring is humid, but not consistently rainy, and the intervals between collection events were stretching. The math was clear. We had water for 12 days. 12 days was not a wall. It was a window, and through it, I could see a future that ended not with violence, but with the quiet, organic failure of 8 bodies, deprived of the one substance no rationing strategy could substitute. I presented the problem to the group at the morning meeting. We had developed these by week 2, a daily assembly at the counter where information was shared and decisions were proposed. The meetings were my initiative, modeled on veterinary clinic rounds, and they functioned well because they gave structure to time that otherwise pooled and stagnated. Each person reported: Marcus on food, me on medical and water, June on external observation, Wes on infrastructure, Tommy on physical security, Dina on scheduling and child welfare, Eli on his notebook. Carol or Caroline had attended the first few meetings silently before her death, occupying space without contributing, and her empty seat at the counter was a gap we had not filled. 12 days, I said. After that, we're drinking rainwater unfiltered, which means gastrointestinal risk, which means fluid loss, which accelerates the dehydration timeline. The creek, Wes said, behind the tree line south of the gas station, visible from the kitchen hatch. A shallow creek ran east toward the Saluda River. We could hear it on quiet nights, a low, continuous murmur that had become a form of auditory torture, proximity to water we could not reach. The creek is 200 yards through the tree line, I said. The tree line is where Wes's speaker sends the infected. Silence. The architecture of our survival. The glass reflection keeping them at the windows, the sound projection pushing them south into the trees, was also the architecture of our confinement. We had built a system of deflection that placed the danger exactly between us and every resource we needed. Our walls were made of the threat itself, arranged in a perimeter of our own design. I can redirect the speaker, Wes said. Point it east instead of south. Push them toward the highway. And the creek run. Someone goes south through the trees while they're moving east. Fills containers, returns. Through the trees, where they've been gathering for 19 days. Wes did not answer. The plan was imperfect, because all plans involving 200 yards of wooded terrain, populated by cognitively developing infected, were imperfect. The question was not whether the plan was good, but whether the alternative, rationing water until we reached the failure threshold, and then attempting the run in a state of dehydration, was worse. Marcus spoke. I'll go. Tommy spoke. Like hell, I'm faster. Speed isn't the issue, I said. Carrying capacity is. Water weighs 8 pounds per gallon. We need minimum 10 gallons to meaningfully extend our timeline. That's 80 pounds. Who here can carry 80 pounds 200 yards through uneven terrain at pace? Marcus could. He was the largest person in the building, broad through the shoulders, with the functional strength of a man who had loaded freight for 20 years. Tommy was fast, but narrow. Wes was lean. I was strong for my size, but my size was 5'4" and 120 pounds. 2 people, Marcus said. 40 pounds each, in and out. Who goes with you? He looked at me. I looked at the water calculation on the counter. 12 days, 80 pounds, 200 yards. Somebody has to do triage if it goes wrong, I said. I should stay. Triage on what? If it goes wrong out there, with injuries, we're not coming back. He was right. I was constructing a reason to stay, and the reason was fear. And fear was not a reason. It was a condition. Fine, I said. We go at dawn. Day 27. Dawn. Wes activated the redirected speaker at first light, projecting the 1,000 hertz tone east along the state road. From the kitchen hatch, I watched the parking lot congregation fragment. most drifting east as predicted, a few remaining at the windows in their reflection trance, the dormant curb sitter absent entirely, which was more troubling than its presence, because absence meant it was somewhere I could not track. Marcus and I went through the service entrance carrying empty gallon jugs. 14 between us, the maximum we could transport and fill within a reasonable time window. We crossed the enclosure wall and moved south into the tree line. And the transition from open parking lot to wooded scrub was a sensory inversion. The flat institutional light of the Waffle House's territory replaced by the filtered, particulate green of loblolly pines and sweet gum. The ground shifting from asphalt to leaf litter that compressed under our feet with a sound like whispered paper. The creek was audible before it was visible. It ran shallow over red clay and sandstone, maybe 8 inches deep at its center, clear enough to see the bottom. Marcus knelt and began filling jugs with a methodical economy of motion. Unscrew cap, submerge, wait for bubbles to stop, cap, set aside, repeat. I knelt beside him and did the same. The water was cold. It smelled like iron and vegetation. It was the most beautiful thing I had encountered in 27 days. We filled 12 jugs in 4 minutes. 2 remained. Marcus was capping the 12th when I heard something that was not water and not wind, and not the distant tone of Wes's speaker. It was a human voice, coming from downstream, from the east, from deeper in the tree line. It said, "Don't run." I turned. 30 yards downstream, standing in the creek bed, was a man. He was alive. Visibly, unmistakably alive, in the way that the infected were not. He was upright with intention, his weight balanced, his eyes tracking us with the focused bilateral coordination that the infected had lost. He wore a hunting vest over a thermal shirt, mud to the knees, and he was holding a compound bow with an arrow nocked but not drawn. "Don't run," he said again. "And don't go back the way you came. There are 4 of them in the tree line between you and the parking lot." Marcus stood slowly, a jug in each hand. "Who are you?" "Name's Dale Kinney. I've been watching your building for 11 days. The sentence rearranged everything. 11 days. Someone had been in the tree line, within 200 yards of our position, observing us, for nearly 2 weeks. He had watched us go dark at night. He had watched Wes's speaker redirect the infected. He had watched me cross to the gas station. He had seen all of this, and chosen not to make contact until now, till we were standing in a creek bed, exposed on 3 sides. "Why didn't you come to us?" I asked. "Because I wasn't sure you were worth the risk. Groups go bad. I've seen 3 go bad since this started. 1 in Greenville, 1 on the highway, 1 at a church outside Pelzer that lasted 9 days before they turned on each other over insulin. We're not turning on each other. Everyone says that at day 27. He knew the day count. He had been tracking us with a specificity that implied more than casual observation. He had been evaluating us the way June evaluated the infected, documenting behavior, noting patterns, assessing threat level. "The 4 in the tree line," Marcus said. "Are they between us and our building?" 3 are. 1 is on your roof." My stomach dropped. The roof. The ventilation hatch. Wes's speaker was projecting through the hatch, which meant the hatch was open, which meant the one thing separating the interior from the exterior on the building's most accessible surface was an open hole. I grabbed my radio. "Wes, close the hatch, now. There's 1 on the roof, static." 2 seconds. 3. Then Wes's voice tight. "I see it. It's sitting on the hatch cover. It's Audrey." It's listening to the speaker, not following the sound. Listening to it. Positioned at the source, attending to the mechanism. Dale Kinney said, "Yeah, that one's different." Dale led us downstream. The detour added 300 yards to our return, but kept the tree line between us and the infected he had identified. And Dale moved through the woods with the compressed efficiency of someone who had been living in them. Not camping, not surviving, but inhabiting, the way a permanent resident inhabits a house. His steps found solid ground without testing it. His body turned sideways through gaps in the undergrowth that Marcus and I would have pushed through noisily. He carried the compound bow across his back, and in his right hand he held a machete, whose blade was dark, with something that was not rust. We emerged from the tree line east of the gas station, circled north through the kangaroo's back lot, and reached the Waffle House's dumpster enclosure without visual contact. Marcus went over the wall first, jug slung across his back in a knotted bedsheet cradle. I followed. Dale stopped at the wall. "I'm not coming inside," he said. "Why not?" "Because inside is a trap. Glass walls, one solid door, a hole in the roof that one of them is currently sitting on. You've built a terrarium, and you're the exhibit. We've survived 27 days. 27 days is not surviving. 27 days is the opening act. The ones out here are changing, and they're changing faster than your glass trick can contain. The one on your roof traveled from the parking lot to the top of the building, which means it climbed. 11 days ago, they couldn't climb. 6 days ago, one of them opened a car door on the state road. 3 days ago, I watched 2 of them coordinate. One flushed a deer from a thicket, and the other was waiting on the opposite side. The information arrived as a sequence of detonations, each one demolishing a load-bearing assumption, climbing, manipulating objects, coordinating. The developmental curve Dale was describing was not the slow grind of evolutionary adaptation. It was the rapid acquisition trajectory of a learning organism, compressing months or years of cognitive development into weeks. "How is that possible?" I asked. "I don't know. I hunted for 30 years. I've watched animals learn. This is faster than any animal I've seen. Whatever is driving them isn't just keeping them alive. It's rebuilding them, not back to human, into something else." I relayed this to the group through the service entrance door, which I kept closed and spoke through. Inside, I could hear the tenor of the room shift. Not panic, which requires energy the group no longer had in surplus, but a recalibration of dread, a downward adjustment of the timeline everyone had been privately maintaining for rescue or resolution. Wes reported from the kitchen. The infected on the roof had not attempted to enter the hatch, but had positioned itself directly over the speaker's projection point and remained there for 20 minutes before moving to the building's edge and descending, climbing down, using the utility ladder, gripping the rungs with functional precision. He had watched it through the hatch with a flashlight, and he set its hands closed around the metal with deliberation, each finger engaging independently. "Fingers," June said from her booth. "Write that down, Eli." Eli wrote it down. Tommy was standing at the front window, something I had warned against repeatedly because silhouette visibility increased with interior movement. "There are more of them," he said. "Way more, I count. 23. Yesterday there were 14. The number was significant not for its size, but for its trend. The parking lot congregation had held between 9 and 15 for 3 weeks. 23 represented a 50% increase overnight. And increases do not happen without cause. "The speaker," Marcus said. He was standing at the grill, not cooking, just standing there with his hands on the steel surface, as though drawing stability from its solidity. "The speaker drew them east this morning. They came back, and they brought others." Wes closed his eyes. His device, his contribution, his ingenuity, had functioned as a beacon, not a deterrent. An attractor. We had been broadcasting our location into the woods for 8 days, and the woods had been listening. Dale was still outside the enclosure wall. I could hear him breathing. "You should come inside," I said through the door. "Your inside is shrinking," he said. "My outside is infinite." Day 33. Dale had not come inside. He had established a circuit, a route through the tree line, along the creek, across the state road's drainage culvert, and back. That he traveled twice daily, appearing at the dumpster enclosure at dawn and dusk to exchange information. He brought us creek water in jugs he filled upstream. He brought us intelligence. He did not bring us comfort, because comfort was not a currency Dale Kinney traded in. On day 33, He arrived at dusk with something new. A proposal. He crouched on his side of the enclosure wall and spoke through a gap in the cinder blocks, and his voice had a quality I'd not heard before. Not urgency, which was his baseline, but something closer to persuasion, which was unfamiliar on him. "There's a National Guard depot outside Williamston," he said. 18 miles west. I found a map in an abandoned cruiser on the state road. The depot is marked. Fuel, vehicles, supplies. It was operational as of 3 weeks ago based on the frequency logs in the cruiser's radio. 3 weeks ago is ancient history. 3 weeks ago is the most recent data anyone in this area has. Your Waffle House runs on a grill and a prayer. The depot runs on diesel generators and military infrastructure. 18 miles is a day's walk. 2 if you're careful. We're not walking 18 miles through occupied territory. You're not walking anywhere. That's the problem. You're sitting in a glass box watching the things outside get smarter while your food gets smaller. At what point does the box stop being a shelter and start being a display case? The metaphor landed because it was precise. I had been feeling it for days. The sense that the Waffle House, with its expansive windows and its illuminated interior, was not a fortress, but a stage, and we were performing survival for an audience that was learning to critique. I brought Dale's proposal to the group. The response split along a line I had not predicted. Marcus opposed leaving. June opposed leaving. Tommy wanted to leave. Wes was undecided. Dina's position was conditional on Eli's safety, which was a variable she could not calculate. Eli did not vote because he was 12, but he wrote in his notebook, "We should see what's out there." The division was not between courage and cowardice. It was between two theories of time. Marcus and June believed that time was an ally. The days spent inside the Waffle House were days during which the outside situation might improve, rescue might arrive, the infected might plateau or decline. Tommy and Dale believed that time was an enemy, that each day strengthened the infected and weakened us, and that the optimal moment to move was always now, because now was always the best we would ever be relative to our opposition. Both theories were defensible. Neither was provable, and the decision between them was not rational but temperamental, a reflection of whether you believed the world tended toward recovery or toward entropy. "We don't all have to go," I said. The sentence changed the geometry of the conversation. Until that moment, the assumption had been binary. We all stay or we all go. But the Waffle House could sustain a smaller group longer. A scouting party could assess the depot and return with the information, or not return, in which case the remaining group would know, by the absence of return, that the route was impassable. "Who goes?" Marcus asked. "I go," I said. "Tommy goes. Dale guides." 3 people on an 18-mile round trip through woods full of things that are learning to use ladders. 3 people with a guide who's been living in those woods for a month. Marcus stared at me. The stare contained calculations I could not access. Risk assessments filtered through a trucker's understanding of distance, a cook's understanding of provision, a man's understanding of what it means to be the one who stays behind and waits. "You come back," he said. It was not a request. It was the terms of a contract he was signing without a pen. "We come back." Dina caught my arm as I passed her booth. "Bring him something," she whispered. "Eli, bring him something from out there. A book, a toy, something that proves the world still has things in it." I promised. It was the easiest promise I had made in 33 days, and the one I was least certain I could keep. We left at false dawn on day 34, through the service entrance and over the enclosure wall into Dale's world. The transition was immediate and total. Inside the Waffle House, danger was theoretical. A pressure observed through glass, managed by reflection and sound, held at arm's length by the systems we had built. Outside, danger was atmospheric. It was in the texture of the air, which carried a biological sweetness I had encountered only once before, in the back room of the veterinary clinic when a dog had died over a weekend. And I had opened the door Monday morning, It was in the quality of the silence, which was not empty, but occupied the silence of a space that contained things that were quiet on purpose. Dale set a pace that was aggressive, but not reckless. He moved through the tree line south of the state road, paralleling Route 20 without walking on it, using the road as a navigational reference while maintaining cover. Tommy followed Dale. I followed Tommy. The order was Dale's decision, explained in a single sentence. I find them, the fast one reacts, the smart one decides. The first 3 miles were uneventful, in the way that driving through fog is uneventful. The absence of incident was not safety, but reduced visibility, and the knowledge that the fog contained objects you would only discover at the moment of collision kept every muscle in my body engaged in a state of readiness that consumed energy at a rate I had not budgeted for. Mile 4, Dale raised his fist. We stopped. Through the trees, on Route 20, a cluster of vehicles, a pileup. 6 or 7 cars compressed into a geometry of mutual destruction. Doors open, contents scattered across the asphalt. Among the vehicles, 8 infected moved in slow patterns, circulating through the wreckage the way scavengers circulate through a carcass, examining objects, lifting things, setting them down. One was sitting in the driver's seat of a minivan with its hands on the steering wheel. Watch, Dale whispered. The one in the minivan turned the steering wheel. Left, right, left. It was not driving. The vehicle was dead, pinned, going nowhere. But the motion was correct. The hands were at 10 and 2. The rotation was smooth and deliberate. It was practicing. Tommy's breathing had changed. It was shallow and fast, the respiratory signature of someone whose nervous system was overriding their composure. I put my hand on his shoulder. He flinched, then settled. They do this at every pileup, Dale said. Sit in the cars, turn the wheels, open and close the doors. I've watched them for hours. It's not random. They're rehearsing. Rehearsing for what? For whatever comes next. We bypassed the pileup through a drainage ditch that ran parallel to the road, crawling on hands and knees through 6 inches of silted water that smelled of gasoline and decay. The crawl took 15 minutes and covered 200 yards, and when we emerged on the other side, Tommy's hands were shaking, and he pressed them flat against his thighs and held them there until the shaking stopped. By mile 8, the terrain shifted. The pine forest thinned into open scrubland, dotted with abandoned agricultural structures, a tobacco barn listing on its foundation, a tractor dealership with its lot fenced down, a single wide trailer with its door hanging open. Dale avoided all structures. They nest, he said. Every building with a roof has at least one. Some have dozens. The church in Pelzer I mentioned. I went back 2 weeks after the group fell apart. 40 of them inside. Sitting in the pews, the image arrived with a specificity I could not dismiss. 40 infected. Seated in rows, facing the altar of a church, arranged in the posture of worship or attention or some cognitive echo of communal assembly. Not praying, not thinking, but arranged. Organized by a principle none of them could articulate. But all of them obeyed. They're congregating, I said. Not randomly. In structures, in formations, in patterns, Dale said. And the patterns are getting more complex. Mile 9, halfway. The sun was above the tree line now, and the day's heat was beginning its slow accumulation in the red clay beneath our feet. Ahead, through the last line of trees, a chain-link fence topped with razor wire caught the light. The National Guard depot was a compound of 4 cinder block buildings arranged around a central motor pool, enclosed by the chain-link perimeter fence, with a vehicle gate on the north side. From the tree line, I could see 2 transport trucks, a Humvee, and a fuel tanker in the motor pool. The gate was closed. The fence was intact. The buildings were dark. Dale had stopped at the tree line's edge and was glassing the compound with a small monocular he carried in his vest. No movement, he said. No infected visible. But the gate chain is cut, not locked. Someone opened it and closed it behind them. Military? Could be anyone with bolt cutters. We approached the gate. Tommy was vibrating with contained energy. The 18 miles had not depleted him, but charged him, converting anxiety into kinetic potential that needed a direction. Dale pulled the gate open enough for us to pass single file, and we moved into the motor pool in a formation that was not tactical but instinctive. Dale forward, Tommy and I flanking, each of us drawn to different points of the compound by different assessments of what mattered. The first building was an armory. The lock was broken, the interior stripped. Empty racks, empty cases, shell casings on the concrete floor. Someone had been here and taken everything designed to kill. What they had not taken, because it was not lethal, because it had no immediate survival value, because desperation narrows the field of relevance to weapons and food, was everything else. I found a field medical kit with surgical supplies, antibiotics, IV fluid bags. I found a crate of MREs, military rations, calorie-dense, shelf-stable, 48 units. I found batteries, flashlights, a hand-crank emergency radio still in its packaging. I found, in a locker in the back office, a map of the region with National Guard deployment positions marked in red grease pencil, dated 5 weeks ago. The map showed 6 deployment positions across the upstate. 4 were crossed out in black, abandoned or overrun. One, near Clemson, was circled in blue with a notation, Hold. CIV evac active. The 6th was our depot, marked with a red X and the word stripped. Clemson, I said. 40 miles northwest. Civilian evacuation active as of 5 weeks ago. Tommy was already loading MRS into his pack. We go. We go back. We bring this information to the group. We plan. Plan what? We're standing in a depot with vehicles and fuel. We drive 40 miles on roads we haven't scouted, toward a position that may have been overrun 3 weeks ago, in a vehicle that announces our presence to every infected in earshot. Dale was in the motor pool examining the Humvee. He opened the hood, inspected the engine, checked the fuel gauge. Half tank, he called. Battery's live. It'll start. The temptation was gravitational. A running vehicle. Fuel. A destination marked active. The components of rescue assembled in front of us like an equation with a visible answer, and every instinct I possessed. The veterinary instinct to stabilize and transport, the human instinct to move toward safety, pulled me toward the driver's seat. But the map was 5 weeks old. 5 weeks, during which the infected had learned to climb, to open doors, to coordinate, to sit in pews. 5 weeks of cognitive acceleration applied to whatever forces had been besieging the Clemson position. The blue circle might represent salvation. It might represent a mass grave. We take the supplies back to the Waffle House, I said. We share the information. We decide together. Dale looked at me from behind the Humvee's hood. Together, 8 people in a restaurant voting on whether to drive towards the maybe. 7 people and a 12-year-old who deserves to have adults consider his safety before they chase a circled word on a map. Tommy stopped loading his pack. He looked at me and I watched the calculation occur. Not the strategic calculation, but the moral one. The recalibration that happens when someone invokes a child's welfare and you realize your urgency has been serving yourself. Fine, he said. We go back. Dale closed the hood. I'll drive. There's a logging road that parallels Route 20. Less exposed. We loaded the Humvee. I placed the map on the dashboard where all 3 of us could see it. The blue circle waited. Clemson, 40 miles. A word that meant something or nothing. We returned to the Waffle House in the Humvee at dusk on day 34, approaching from the west along the logging road Dale knew, killing the engine 200 yards out and coasting the final distance to avoid broadcasting our arrival. The parking lot held its usual congregation, 20-some figures in the fading light, most at the windows, a few in the circular drift patterns June had documented. The Humvee's arrival produced no visible reaction, which was itself information. They had acclimated to vehicles. Cars were no longer novel stimuli. They were furniture. Marcus opened the service entrance before I knocked. He had been watching from the kitchen hatch. His face, when he saw me, performed a rearrangement I had not anticipated. The controlled mask he wore, the trucker's stoicism, cracked along a line I had not known existed, and for 1 second, I saw the fear that had been living behind it since day one. Then the mask reassembled. "You came back," he said. "What did you find?" I laid the map on the counter. The group gathered. I explained the depot, the stripped armory, the medical supplies and MREs we had carried in. The Humvee with its half-tank. I pointed to the blue circle. Clemson, civilian evacuation, active as of 5 weeks ago, 40 miles. The room processed this in silence, not the hostile silence of disagreement, but the dense silence of people performing simultaneous internal calculations with different variables and different weights. June spoke first. 5 weeks is a long time. 5 weeks is the only data we have. The only data we have is also the most dangerous kind. It gives us just enough hope to be reckless. Wes studied the map with the technical eye of a man who read schematics for a living. The logging road. Does it run the full distance? Dale says it connects to a forestry access network that reaches within 8 miles of Clemson. The last 8 miles are state highway. 8 miles of open road in a military vehicle that they've stopped noticing. Dina was holding Eli against her side. Not protectively. He was too old and too independent for that. But connectively, maintaining physical contact as though the touch was a data cable transmitting information she could not get any other way. "What if it's gone?" she said. "What if we drive 40 miles and there's nothing? Then we've used half a tank of fuel and we're 40 miles from our food supply with no guaranteed return. And if we stay..." I looked at the inventory sheet. The MRS extended our timeline, but the extension was finite. The parking lot numbers were growing. The infected were developing. The glass theory was eroding. The reflection that had protected us was a trick of light, and light is the most temporary medium in the physical world. If we stay, we reach a point where the food runs out and the things outside can open doors. That point is not distant. It's convergent. Marcus, who had been silent, placed both hands flat on the counter. "I'll cook the last real meal this place has in it. Tomorrow morning. Eggs, bacon, grits, the works. Everything in the cooler that's still edible. We eat together like people. Then we get in the truck." It was not a strategic statement. It was not a rallying cry. It was a cook declaring that the kitchen would serve one final meal before it closed, and the dignity of that declaration. The insistence that the ending of this place be marked by the thing the place was built to do, settled over the group like a hand on a shoulder. Eli looked up at his mother. "Can I have a waffle?" Dina looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the broken waffle iron he had set aside on day one, the appliance that had defined the restaurant's identity and that had been non-functional since before we arrived. "I'll fix it." He said it quietly, already moving toward the iron, already seeing the problem as circuitry and connection, already translating grief into repair. That night, I stood at the window in the dark. The infected pressed their palms to the glass. I pressed mine to the other side. Between us, 6 inches of plate glass and the reflection of something neither of us recognized. Tomorrow we would drive toward a circle on a map. Night, someone was fixing a waffle iron. The waffle iron worked. Wes replaced a thermal fuse with a component stripped from the coffee maker, and at dawn on day 35, Marcus poured batter onto the griddle plates, and the smell filled the Waffle House with something that was not nostalgia but its opposite, a present-tense sensory event so immediate and unambiguous that every person in the building stopped what they were doing and stood still. Eli ate 3 waffles. June ate 1 and cried without explanation. Tommy ate standing up, watching the parking lot, syrup on his chin. We loaded the Humvee in silence. 8 people, supply packs, medical kit, water jugs, Dale's bow, Marcus's cast iron skillet he refused to leave. The parking lot was full. 30 figures, maybe more, palms on glass, watching reflections that no longer confused them, but that they visited anyway. the way the living visit graves. Marcus drove. Dale navigated. I sat in the back with Eli, who held his notebook open to the page where he had drawn the dormant figure with its palms raised. Beneath the drawing, in his careful 12-year-old handwriting, he had added a new line. Maybe they remember. The Humvee turned west. The Waffle House grew small in the mirror. The blue circle waited.